Breakfast with Charlie State and Naga Munchetti.
So let's go back now to more news from the general election campaign. The Liberal Democrats say the party would triple the tax on social media companies and digital businesses like Amazon and Google to pay for a mental health professional in every school in England.
Let's talk to the party's education spokesperson, Munira Wilson. Munira Wilson, good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us. A mental health professional in every school in England, where are they coming from?
Good morning, Naga. Well, we have a mental health crisis amongst our children and young people across the country. 1 in 5 children is struggling with their mental health. That's on average about 6 in every classroom. 340,000 are languishing on waiting lists. This is a mental health emergency amongst our children, who should be our top priority as a country. They've been abandoned by the Conservative Party, which is why we're saying every primary and secondary school should have access to a dedicated, qualified mental health professional. And we know that there are professionals out there who are working in counselling, particularly for adults, who are ready and willing to work with children and young people. But we need to focus on this with the urgency that it deserves, because we cannot have children turning up to school not ready to learn, in fact, not turning up to school at all because of their mental health pressures, and we're seeing that crisis across the country.
There are more than 24,000 schools in England. Where are you getting the mental health professionals from?
Well, there are, as I say, there are professionals who are already working with adults who have said that they are prepared to step up and work with children and young people. Of course, we need to train more.
Sorry, could I just be clear on that?
Yes.
So you say they're already working with young people, so these aren't extra.
Sorry, there are adults who are working in counselling, in mental health, who have said that they would be willing to get the extra training to be able to work with children and young people. Of course, we would need to train more. They wouldn't be available overnight, but we need to make that commitment and give children's mental health the priority it deserves. Naga, just 3 weeks ago, a grieving mother came up to me in a local park after her teenage child had taken her own life. This is not a one-off. Unfortunately, speaking to head teachers and teachers, not just in my constituency, but across the country, we know that there are many children who are on the brink of trying to take their lives. I've heard of several who've ended up in A&E just in my constituency in the last 2 months. This is an emergency. We need to give it the priority it deserves, and by putting a dedicated mental health professional in every school across the country, we would be taking that early action, early intervention to stop problems spiralling, because we cannot go on like this and we are letting down children.
I don't think the issue is whether or not this is an important issue. I think it's largely accepted this is a very important issue. The issue is how to fund it, how to find those mental health professionals. And you say it won't happen overnight. Would it happen over the course of a parliament? At the moment, if you take a look at Birmingham and Solihull, there is a waiting list, a mental health waiting list for young people. There is 17,000 children on that waiting list, just in Birmingham and Solihull. So that, even 24,000 mental health experts, professionals across all the schools, that's not going to touch the sides when it comes to just that waiting list.
No, and the problem is that the Conservatives have abandoned children's mental health over their time in government, and that's why we have these waiting lists, which of course it will take time. You asked about funding. We've made it very clear that we would treble the digital services tax, which would more than pay for this policy of a mental health professional in every school. It would also go towards paying for community mental health support hubs. But you're right, in that really acute setting where children are in crisis, again, there aren't the hospital beds. Many are sent many, many miles away from where they live, or are put totally unsuitably in general paediatric wards. So there is a real problem that needs to be treated with utmost urgency. And you talk about there not being enough people. Well, we know that actually there are plenty of people who are taking degrees and other qualifications in things like psychology, who are interested in going into clinical psychology, but there aren't necessarily the training places available, which is why we need a proper both health and education workforce workforce plan, because at the moment the burden is falling on our teachers and school staff, and it's taking them away from teaching day to day in order to be able to support our children and young people. Schools have become the fourth emergency service. We need to give them the tools and the support that they deserve, and our children, most importantly, desperately deserve.
We're obviously in an election period, a campaigning period. Labour has suggested a very, very similar plan. What's the difference?
Well, the Labour Party have only focused on secondary schools. The Liberal Democrats have said we need to ensure that we have these professionals in every primary and secondary school, because by the age of 14, half of mental health conditions that we see in adults have already set in. So early intervention is key.
Okay.
I've witnessed myself in a primary school, a 7-year-old having to be restrained in a classroom and locked in a classroom on their own because they were a danger to others.
And
this is a problem that is starting in
countless
primary
examples,
school.
and it is very distressing, obviously. I do want to talk to you about the Liberal Democrats and policies when it comes to the economy. So Ed Davey has pledged not to raise taxes for ordinary people. Maybe you can clarify. We've heard from the Labour Party and the Conservatives that they will not raise VAT, for example. Will you raise VAT during Parliament?
Well, as Ed has said, we would want to raise taxes in a fair way, not on the backs of hard-working people. We would not look to raise VAT or income tax or national insurance. What we've set out is that we would reverse the cuts in tax to the big banks. I've set out today how we would tax more the tech giants and digital and social media companies. We've also said that we would, for instance, levy a tax on share buyback schemes. We'd also close the loopholes in the windfall tax and increase that. Those are the companies and the organisations who have frankly benefited from many of the problems both in our economy and our society, and they should be paying their fair share, not hard-working people in the midst of a cost of living crisis when we've got the highest tax burden since the war.
So you've spoken about companies, institutions that would be taxed. So can I just make clear, when you use the phrase ordinary people or hard-working people, who are the non-ordinary people or the non-hard-working people, and how would you define them, and are they going to be taxed?
As I've said, by ordinary people, I mean people who live in this country, up and down the country, who are paying the highest taxes since the war. Those are the people that we don't want to be taking
I'm still not quite clear.
Burden.
Is there an individual person who will be taxed more?
When we set out our manifesto, as we always do, Naga, we will set out a fully costed tax plan to pay for every policy that we set out. And in the past, the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies has always been very complimentary about how well costed the Liberal Democrat manifesto is.
I still don't know if there's going to be an individual who will be taxed more if the Liberal Democrats get into government.
Well, I can't give you that answer now. I'm more than happy to come back to you, Naga, when our manifesto is published and it's fully costed. But we have said that people up and down the country who are paying the highest tax burden since the war will not be paying more in taxes. We have made it very clear where our priorities are on those big organisations that have made billions from the misery of the cost of living crisis and the social media companies that are fueling the mental health crisis amongst our children and young people. They should be taking that additional burden, not the British people.
Munira Wilson, education spokesperson, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC Breakfast.